welcome to episode number 4 of Into the Foxhole. I'm your host, Jeff Fox. My guest for this episode is Matt Henderson. Matt holds a master's degree in public administration from the University of Florida. Matt is abundantly knowledgeable of politics as he has worked for politicians at both the local and state level, and also because, as he put it, he reads a shit ton of books. In our conversation, we went in with the intent of talking about how the Democratic Party cloaks itself in slogans, pretends to care about working people, and fundraises using the exact same methods as Republicans, which essentially leaves both parties beholden to corporate donors, and to vote for laws that do not fulfill campaign promises or protect the middle class. Our intention was to help illustrate that in an age when we have been led to believe by the major media that it's good versus bad or left versus right, that it is more important than ever for voters, no matter what party they affiliate with, to remain as objective as possible and find news sources other than the entertainment brands, such as Fox News, MSNBC, and CNN. For damn sure, do not trust memes. The podcast conversation begins right when we get to the idea that being a Democrat for many is simply the only alternative to being a Republican, not a deeply held belief. The people who control the narrative want the money system to stay the way it is, where there's an imbalance.
That's why we need to elect more Democrats, because they're totally against that, right?
Exceptional.
I mean, Trump is not a symptom of the disease. He's the actual disease. And once you get rid of him, things go back to normal, right?
Exceptional segue, my friend. I was going to ask, is our topic of the day Democrats, or what would you phrase it as?
I'm a recent convert to the Democratic Party. I was raised Republican my whole life. I know we had this discussion about how you were an independent and you wanted to vote. Since Florida has closed primaries, you wanted to vote in the primary for a Democratic candidate.
Yeah.
So you became a Democrat, so you could do that. I had a similar experience this last go-around. So I am now a Democrat. And I just think it's far more interesting to be self-reflective and kind of, air out your own dirty laundry as opposed to always pointing fingers.
Right.
Like, if you're with a group of Democrats, I just feel like it's intellectually lazy to only bash Trump the entire time. It's just way more interesting to, throw one of our own under the bus.
Interestingly, makes me think of the book Hate Incorporated. I finally started to, not read, but listen to that. And, he points that out specifically, that whether it's Fox News or it's MSNBC, all the reporting is geared towards the opposite side. That's the villain, right? So there is no hard look at the Democratic Party on MSNBC or criticism.
And that pretty much shows that financial incentive has forced out objectivity. And that's a really unfortunate thing if you want the real news. What you're getting instead is a consumer product that's tailor-made for a niche market. And I know the origins are in Fox. Roger Ailes figured it out pretty easily, where he was just like, you know what? Fuck everyone else. These people will be the bread and butter, and I'm going to give them exactly what they want. And left media has followed suit. It's really funny to me, talking out of both sides of their mouth that goes on some place like CNN, because you hear the anchors being like, man, we can't give Trump a platform like we're giving him on all these press conferences. We just can't do that. We gave him $2 billion worth of free ads in 2016 with how much coverage we gave him. We can't do that again. And then meanwhile, they're like, yeah, but we're making so much fucking money off the guy. The bosses are telling us we got to cover this. So it's just I don't know how cynical it is to where they actually want to stop because they're making record profits.
Right. Well, and what I was going to say is, didn't Barack Obama comment on that in 2016? The fact that as much as certain outlets want to denounce Trump, they won't stop playing him, that they're giving him the platform.
I definitely heard that from various pundits. I don't remember Obama saying that. I remember that he was laying fairly low. It seems like the Obama strategy is to lay low, and kind of just he's like a behind the scenes type of worker where he'll lean on people behind the scenes but not make as big of a comment. But who knows, man? I mean, he was president then, so I know I forget whether he was one of the louder voices pointing that out.
Yeah, I'm sure it was coming from 12 different angles, but it's definitely funnier when it's a pundit saying it and then they're like, now watch this clip of Trump.
Yeah. I mean, it's Chris Como, like that fucking garlic knot meatball from CNN.
Yeah.
I recently watched videos of him working out, and like, there's no doubt this dude would fucking tear me apart. I mean, he's like deadlifting all this shit. But so that dude, he gave an interview.
He's Governor
recently.
Cuomo's brother, right?
Yeah, and their daddy was governor, and I'm sure they were raised just like everyone else. But he gave an interview on some podcast that he had to like totally back up, that he was just pretty much like, yeah, I fucking hate my job. It's not fulfilling. I pretend that I care about all this partisan stuff, and I don't. And he just pretty much took the mask off completely. And then, he's right back to whipping up that consumer product.
Then his bosses said, we're going to fucking can you unless you can fix this.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, you got to give the people what they want, dude. And there's nothing more than the left loves than clutching their pearls and just being like feigning outrage about how terrible Trump is.
Yeah, what's interesting is how Matt Taibbi talked about the standard, which used to be good business practice, was remaining in that nonpartisan, objective voice when writing, and how as soon as 24-hour news cycles came about, and especially with the arrival of like Fox News and MSNBC, that destroyed that business model.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's kind of like when it was more like in the early stages, it was understood that you pretty much take a loss when it comes to news. Like, it's a public service. And you make your money off of sports and other entertainment. But now it's like reporting the news has come and eaten so much into the entertainment market, where even if you're watching like a debate or like anything that's going on in a primary, it's set up like it's fucking ESPN or something, where it's like a horse race, and pictures and graphics, stats, and it's just like four dudes sitting around a table like it's like Terry Bradshaw talking about zone defenses or some shit. It's just like the whole thing is just like become it's like a commodity. The format's really funny though, just like nonstop. I think everyone's pretty much fatigued of it. I used to work in politics, and I was like, I'm gonna get out. I'm getting kind of tired, and then last few years, I feel like everyone just has the politics shoved down their throat. It's tough.
I really wonder if people who watch MSNBC realize that it's essentially the equivalent of Fox News on the other extreme, or if they're like, get out of here, that's fucking ridiculous.
Yeah, no, I think that they probably could recognize it a little bit, but they would just lean back onto the Fox is so much worse. The Republicans are so much worse.
I've watched people like Rachel Maddow and Chris Hayes, and the difference I see is definitely that I see more sourced and factual reporting coming from them than like if I were to tune into Sean Hannity's.
Sure.
However
like
long he gets.
It appears like, even though it's an op-ed for like both of them, it's just like it's an opinion piece, but they do cite more, real journalists, I guess. But I mean, I'm sure there's
quote unquote real
bias. Well, it's like, they're using that, but I'm pretty sure they're using it to solidify what they're trying to say anyway, as opposed to contradicting themselves.
Confirmation bias going on.
Yeah. This is kind of the greater point, though. Like, if they are willing to admit they're similar to Fox, the conversation ends there. I mean, that's once you give an inch, someone could take a mile. Whereas I like to dig down even more and be like, oh, let's find a few examples of how they're sucking Satan's cock and selling out big time to the corporation. Which politicians are doing this too.
A metaphor that Taibbi used in his book, which I think he said came from some other old school journalist, was shoveling coal for Satan.
That's great.
And I think that was a metaphor for journalism in the sense of like, just pandering to the crowd.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating when you kind of get into the origins of everything. Like, I got really into this deep dive when I read Chris Hedges, who's like up there with Matt Taibbi with me. If Taibbi is like my best friend, Chris Hedges is like my dad. You got Noam Chomsky is the grandfather, and Glenn Greenwald's my gay cousin. But I love Chris Hedges so much, man. He in this book he wrote called "Death of the Liberal Class," he traces back because America has such a strong socialist and communist presence that was just been totally erased, like from our collective memory. Like no one really knows anything about labor struggles, and you learned about maybe the Pinkertons or something like that, snuffing out some people trying to form a union, but it's very little understanding. And he traces this back to the conservative media effort. You know the term yellow journalism, like that old school term with like William Randolph Hearst.
No, I don't think so.
So this was something they would kind of cover in like a history class in high school. Was the origin of when newspapers started printing total bullshit and propaganda in the United States. It was like the Lusitania, which was preemptive of getting into war, like saying it got bombed. Like the way they spread stories was like pretty much not factual, and the whole point was to manipulate the people and what they're reading to sway public opinion. And during World War one of the big things that President Wilson got elected for was keeping us out of the war. That was like what he ran on in 1916. It's like, oh, he kept us out of war. And then this book gets into a fascinating how they started this thing called the Creel Commission. And there was all these like bureaucratic bodies that opened up, and it was the beginning of the Public Relations Agency. And this guy, Edward Bernays, actually wrote the book on propaganda. This is like, one of Joseph Goebbels' favorite books. It was pretty much like the whole, how do you manipulate people to sway public opinion was like formed in the United States in the early of 20th century. And it turned a whole bunch of like pacifists, non-interventionists, which is what we were in this country, to people hungry for blood. Let's go kill those Huns over in Germany. And it's like a case study of like how they got America to want to enter World War One.
I had heard of a false flag operation to pull the U.S. into World War One that had to do with a submarine being shot.
Yeah, this is the Lusitania. I think that this is the Lusitania. Yeah, it's a long, rich history of this occurring, of how to sway public opinion. But the current state of things, it's just it's wild what we're at, where it's just consumer products for Republicans, consumer products for Democrats that never get self-reflective and admit that they might be part of the problem as well.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the bigger points that we've been discussing is with Joe Biden being the candidate, how many times someone has been... like as Bill Hicks put it, shh, go back to sleep. Here's a cookie. Like stop talking about that. Which I just shared the Tara Reid article you forwarded to me from The Intercept by Ryan Grimm. And my message to all my friends and family on Facebook who probably despise me right now, or at least some, it was, we have two presidential candidates who grab women by the pussy then.
Yeah, it's a tough position to be in, man, because people hate Trump to where like the whole election is centered around, there's no more policy debate. It's all basically Trump is a cancer and he needs to be removed, and Biden is the one that can do that. It's proven. And then people that are kind of paying attention are like, is that proven? I mean, you line up these guys' stats, there's a lot of similarities. Say what you want to about Bernie, but I'm pretty sure Bernie's like sexual proclivities don't cancel out Trump.
Oh, what do you mean by that?
Oh, just basically like Biden rapes, Trump rapes too, whatever, cancels each other out. This is like basically a stance that you could have.
Well, that was kind of the joke. The joke I made was, well, at least the playing field is level on that front.
Yeah,
so now we'll just focus on the racism and authoritarianism. I don't know.
I mean, it's just in the short term, I just think people believe things would be better. I mean, like, it'll be better. It'll be less chaotic. We're definitely in a very, very, chaotic reality these days.
I think kind of backpedaling to what you said about, well, he's a cancer and we just need to get rid of him. It kind of made me think of something we talked about the other day, too, where I said, honestly, in every presidential election except the 2008 one, and I guess the 2012 one, too, I felt like it was really, people always say the lesser of two evils. I really felt like, well, I don't want either of these guys, but I guess if I'm forced to choose, I'll take that guy.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And that's what it is again.
It's just like the terrible system that we have right now has been built upon voting the lesser of two evils. I mean, like, if you think about all the policies, the lesser of two evils, let's go back to Clinton. Clinton's obviously the lesser of two evils with George Bush, right? Well, George Bush, he could never pass NAFTA. George Bush wouldn't have been able to pull off all, like, for instance, like Clinton's crime bill. Like, so there's all these examples where, like, sometimes they really don't seem like they are the lesser of two evils because of what Democrats are allowed to get done. Like, basically sneak past the left, which would be staunchly against it if, like, a Republican was trying to do that. Like I say, HW, he tried to pass NAFTA, got shut down, left against it. You have Clinton come in, who uses triangulation, gets the left to fall asleep. We don't hold our own accountable, and this just obviously is politics, but too bad. Let's say, for instance, okay, McCain became president. I'm going to take some of the stuff that happened during Obama. For instance, Obama kicked 5 million people out of their houses while not prosecuting any bankers, allowing the bankers to get big. Would that have been able to happen under a Republican? Like, would McCain have been able to take us from 2 wars to 7 wars?
7?
Well, people have found, because we started droning Somalia and Pakistan and Yemen. So people kind of count that as because it wasn't just like a one-time thing. We had continued bombing campaigns. But the other big ones are Libya and Syria. Pretty much, I think that the anti-war people are a lot more forgiving to Obama for taking out the no-fly zone in Libya and what happened, like, with intervention there than they would have under McCain. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just like one of those things where sometimes a Democrat in power is actually passing super duper corporate policies and stuff that Republicans would not have been able to, like, sneak by.
Well, I guess after Iraq and Afghanistan, the slogan became "No boots on the ground." So then they were like, "Oh, well, we'll fly remote-controlled killing machines in there," and everyone seemed to be okay with that.
Well, it's just like it's basically no boots on the ground meant no traceable deployment of people. Even though Obama did surge Afghanistan early on, but you're right, his primary technique was no boots on the ground. But like in Syria and Libya, like, we're running special ops. One of the bigger popular ones became JSOC, which is like the joint special ops one, where it's like combinations of Delta Force and SEALs and all these guys. So like we always had boots on the ground. It just like wasn't talked about or reported on.
Yeah,
because Obama's that's just the way he operates. He's definitely not as showy, but he's a lot more murdery. like W. Bush, he'll kill you, he'll kidnap you or buy you from someone and throw you in Guantanamo, but Obama will just turn you into fucking dust. There's a lot less. Another thing is like Obama's going to close Guantanamo. It's just he starts, and sure enough, a lot of the people there's less got some time. But
Obama is Thanos, and
yeah, absolutely.
George W. Bush was more like Loki.
Yeah, that's it. It's a good analogy. Oh, it's slightly racist though, because Loki was, a white fella, and Thanos is purple. I'm not sure what you're trying to say. But.
Well, also what was sold in the Thanos character was the humanity of him.
Right.
He did what he did for the greater good, which was where Loki was just power hungry.
That's true. That is funny.
Don't make me nerd out.
Thanos is just sitting like he's like Henry David Thoreau, like on Walden Lake. He's just like transcendental moments and shit at the end of that.
He's
I can
like,
imagine the Alex Jones spin.
It's funny too because whereas his garb, his uniform before was like made out of gold or something, then he's wearing like tattered threads.
Yeah, he had some like hippies in a drum circle, like he bartered for some stuff made out of gingham. Give you 3 acorns for your hacky sack.
Are those secondhand Birkenstocks? My, how you've changed.
Was it before we were talking about how a lot of the policies that got implemented that you were pretty much on the Democrats' watch? This is one of those things where people listening to this, they immediately there's a lot of examples to point out of how terrible the Republicans are, but we're not interested in that. We want to make our own bed.
Perhaps there's that. I definitely like to just point out false narratives, no matter which side is perpetuating them. On the conservative side, they always want to point out how much Democrats spend. I did a little research into that, in which I found when you're adjusting for inflation rates, nobody spent more money than Ronald Reagan. And it's funny to me because conservatives and Fox News are always like, Ronald Reagan, oh, the Gipper. Let's put his face on Rushmore or whatever.
Yeah, he's so articulate, that guy. It's like he's good at reading scripts or something. And scene.
Imagine that. You put an actor in office and can trick everybody.
He can communicate well. He's a great communicator. Yeah, but anyway.
I think it had to do with Bill Clinton. When now you're kind of jogging my memory in mentioning how there are secret ops soldiers who almost always go to countries that we're pretty much not told about. That happens throughout every presidency, right?
Oh yeah, dude. I mean, I don't know about 19th century type of stuff, but I mean,
no, I'm talking 20th century and 21st century.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think post World War II is like where there's the most evidence of that happening, and it's basically under the guise of fighting communism. The Cold War was actually like really, really hot in a lot of locations, like Iran or Guatemala, like. CIA and like various special ops were all over the place fighting during the Cold War, and no one knows that.
The Bay of Pigs things comes to mind.
That one's really interesting. I would say that one's really interesting because we always, under the guise of we use, freedom fighters. Like there's a lot of Cubans involved in that, and like Cubans were trained for that particular operation. Yeah. So I mean, there tends to be the approach of like a hybrid. Like in Syria, like CIA wasn't necessarily fighting all of Bashar al-Assad's or ISIS's forces. We use like proxies. So there's like, it's like special ops and like proxies that we use to fight.
Is that akin to giving Al-Qaeda guns and saying they're fighting on our side now?
Yeah. That is the best example, I think, because I'm not sure if you ever saw that Tom Hanks movie, Charlie Wilson's War, but I highly recommend it. It was all about in the 1980s.
I've heard about what Charlie Wilson did.
Yeah. So like that was the Mujahideen War to break the back of USSR and Afghanistan. It was basically give the USSR their own like Vietnam. So it was crazy how we funneled the money and weapons to the Mujahideen, which did become Al Qaeda. So yeah. I mean, but that's the best proxy example. And then fast forward later, we're at war with Al Qaeda after 9/11. Well, fast forward even later, and we're allies with Al Qaeda, which we currently are.
Yeah, that's nuts. If I'm not mistaken, wasn't part of the deal on the U.S.'s part promising Al Qaeda that they would get Russia, not only that they would get Russia out of Afghanistan, but that they would then
get as much Russian pussy as they want. Yeah, that was part of it. We're like, you go over that border, boy, you eat up. No, obviously they're austere religious guys that don't like pussy. I get it.
I couldn't remember the specifics, but the U.S. promised like a lot of support to Al Qaeda.
I mean, like there was definitely a lot of reach arounds that was going on. Like that's when we were allies, obviously, because Osama bin Laden was part of the Mujahideen, and we were on good terms with him for a really, really good time. Lots of things were promised. One of the things that he wanted to do was have a jihad against the Saudi royal family and or Saddam Hussein. And so, I mean, like there's a lot of promises that were made that were subsequently broken.
Right, and that's what I kind of was thinking. I had read in one of the books that I was reading in like early 2000s that was one of the catalysts for his attack on the U.S. It was like, oh, well, they came in and they made all these promises to us. It was really just that they wanted us to help them with the Soviets, and then they took off and left us hanging. And I can't really recall all of the negatives that they might have pointed out as a result of the U.S. backing out.
Yeah, I mean, like the movie kind of gets into it, but it has more to do with like rebuilding the nation and like investing in infrastructure and education and stuff like that. I
Yeah.
mean, geopolitically, with like strengthening Al Qaeda, I mean, you pretty much give them training, logistics, and arms. And I feel like it's one of the lessons that we never ever figure out. I mean, like you could probably pick someone who we're allies with tomorrow that will be our enemy in a couple weeks. It just seems
Yeah.
to never work out ever. So it's funny to me, like just to get back to we were talking about what's happening in Syria now, where we are allies with Al Qaeda. It never ideally works out. And you have to wonder whether the politicians are just super cynical and they just know that, and they're telling the American people a whole bunch of bullshit. And I assume that that's the case. I don't think they're in earnest. One of the stories that kind of got overlooked, with everything that's been going on with impeachment or coronavirus, was the Afghanistan papers. Are you familiar with those at all?
No.
Dude, this is a great Google. And I believe it was Washington Post who had them. This is kind of like the Pentagon Papers of our era, because it's an internal report. So basically, the Inspector General, I forget which bureaucratic channel, whether it was Army or just DOD, they interviewed like hundreds of people, all people like Donald Rumsfeld, generals, logistics people, contractors, all about the Afghanistan war. And the big revelation that came out is they knew it was a failure. They knew it was a boondoggle. They didn't even know who the enemy was sometimes. I mean, basically everyone admits to being terrible, but if you watch what they disclosed in public, like things are going great, we're winning the war, here's a bunch of statistics, they have more cows in Afghanistan, it's like really weird metric that they were like trying to show that we were winning. But the whole time they knew it was a total clusterfuck. And so the Afghanistan papers indicates that, but barely even a story, man. CNN and MSNBC are talking about, how impeachment and maybe we can sway a few senators and Trump is gone. And it's just like, and they're missing real fucking news, real things that, implements Republicans and Democrats. And it's what the people want to hear, man. I mean, I just believe that people just don't know what's going on.
Yeah, I feel like that is a symptom of a Trump presidency, is that he's been doing this ever since before he was a candidate, and pointing out or bringing up the whole birth certificate thing for Obama. But since he's been president, it's like not even every week, every couple of days, he's tweeting about something that's meant to draw attention away from something else he's involved in.
And guess who eats that shit up?
The American public?
Yeah, man. The Democrats and CNN and MSNBC. It's just like they can't even stay focused on one goddamn thing. And Trump plays them like a violin. He keeps things super chaotic, keeps the lies flowing, and they just move on to the next story, It's just like you can't even take a fucking breath. Like everyone's head is spinning. And like I say, man, it's easy just to solely blame Trump, and there's plenty of that out there.
Yeah.
But there's culpability in the media and also the left-leaning politicians.
Yeah, sometimes you got to wonder, like, when he says something so absurd, like even hinting at the thought of injecting some kind of disinfectant, if he says that intentionally because he knows that people in the media will jump all over it and that's all they'll talk about for the next 24 to 48 hours.
Yeah, he definitely does that, man. I mean, there's no denying it. Like, this dude is, as much as you want to say he's an idiot and blah, 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 blah. Well, not you. I just mean, dude, he is so good at, like, understanding that politics is just one reality television show. Yeah. He just knows how to use headlines, man. I think some people refer to it as the big lie, where it's just like one constant lie. And that's how you do it, man. And you don't admit to anything. And that technique has been adopted by Biden. Biden gets called out by Bernie for being a liar. And he just says, oh, it's not true. I never said that.
Yeah, you were referencing that last debate they had, right? When
Yeah. Bernie's like shocked because he doesn't know how to handle like someone blatantly lying. So he's just like, you go on YouTube, you Google, Joe Biden and Medicare cuts, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Yeah. So, I mean, like, that's just the left and the right has just taken the format of don't admit to anything. Like, just fuck that. The Trump formula is working. You know, I mean, when you put out shady, compromised corporate whores like Biden as a politician, it's so much easier just denying it than explaining, your voting record of the last 35 years.
Makes me think of something that I actually would like to get into a little depth on. Is this comes up in debate rhetoric or on social media rhetoric a lot, is two things: the term the establishment, and the second is saying that someone is like a corporate monkey or corporate whore. One thing is we both started to read that book. We've got people where they talk about Jesse Jackson's run for president. The Democratic Party started to move towards a certain direction after his run. But like specifically with Joe Biden, who do you know that he's working on behalf of or has accepted money from?
So one of the things that pops in my head immediately, which is very funny to me, is Elizabeth Warren, her like origin story of like why she got into politics was pushing back against like the credit card bill that like Biden was the biggest advocate for. And pretty much she entered politics to push back against Biden. And it basically makes like lower level consumers like much harder to like file bankruptcy for, increased credit card billing, while other, more white collar loopholes still exist. So Elizabeth Warren was like, fuck this. I'm getting into politics to end this. Didn't even come up during the primary. Like, she did not even bring this up. Like, it made no sense. It made me think that she was cutting a deal with Biden early on.
To be his VP, perhaps. Who knows? Yeah, that reminds me of what...
Did you see when she was asked, would you be his VP?
You mean where she was in her driveway and they were interviewing her?
Yeah. Pretend I'm her. Ask me real quick.
Miss Warren, have you?
Yes. You have to finish the question. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. As a woman of color, I was offended by it.
You reminded me of how you said Obama called the other candidates like within that week.
This is one of those things where I want to see the smoking gun, because dude, everyone is referencing, Obama's making calls behind the scenes, calling Mayor Pete and Amy Klobuchar, get them to drop out. Like, it's funny, man. I definitely believe it. I mean, like, lots of respectable people are saying it. I just feel like I want to know the source, but that's his move, man. He's like, I'm not going to comment about, I'll let democracy flourish and let the people choose. I don't want to sway the election. Yeah. And meanwhile, he's like picking up the phone and trying to get his guy on there,
Well,
there's a bunch of horse shit.
In talking about some of the more shady practices in politics, it makes me think of, what was that term you used about envelope handoffs?
Right. Oh, like the bagman? Like
the bagman. So it makes me think of the shady guys in trench coats that show up and they meet on a park bench and they basically say, like, look at all this blackmail material I have on you. Drop whatever you're doing.
Yeah. Here you are on Epstein's Island. Is that your daughter, sir?
Or just flat out like, I killed your pet cat or something. Like, do you want to be next?
Yeah, that was that Clinton story, man. Like, one of the chicks that came out like hard against Clinton, one of the many, many women that came out and said they either got like raped straight up by Clinton or had like some terrible sexual misconduct. They like killed her cat. Like, this one guy like corners her like in a parking lot while she's jogging, scares the shit out of her. But yeah, that was apparently it. They like destroyed her car, murdered her pet, and like physically threatened her. But hey, man, still wouldn't do that.
Well, speaking of smoking guns, though, when you hear stories like that, are you then perpetuated to look for like any pictures or evidence of that stuff? Because I know like that's the first thing I do.
I mean, like, yeah. I mean, like, whenever you have peak interest in something, you should definitely check it out before you're going to say that as fact. And that one definitely had smoke to it. So
there was pictures of, say, like her car being messed up?
No, I mean, I looked at pictures of her. I don't usually Google stuff like mutilated cats.
Right.
I'll leave that for you.
Okay.
But I do think that that's an important thing to do. And this is a little hearsay. I'm repeating. I believe it was Christopher Hitchens. He wrote this really great book called No One Left to Lie To. So when you read some of these things in these books, and it's just a polemic against Clinton, like they have so many editors and fact checkers. I'm not saying that anything that's in print, is like the gold standard. But I tend to take stuff at face value when it's like, a New York Times bestseller. Like I say, that shouldn't be the gold standard. But there's so many fact checkers to where there's like libel and slander laws and like so many lawsuits that could be brought if this ended up being total bullshit.
Yeah, I'm not trying to be a gotcha journalist.
No. I think I told you before. I don't want to be perceived as a bullshitter. So
yeah, it's just interesting because I don't know if I ever mentioned how the title of the show is sort of synonymous with the rabbit hole, even though people think it's about anus. But how like you get.
It's the only reason I agreed to do the show.
I was told there'd be anus.
Yeah.
You get sucked into this hole. I mean, I've spent definitely hours before researching stuff on the internet, and sometimes it can become frustrating because you just read one thing after another, and you're like, I can't draw the line from A to B. But then again, I guess that's where, like, to come full circle, we were talking about confirmation bias, where some people just go, look, there's this and there's this, and that's why this is a fact.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's definitely connecting the dots and become very, very convenient.
So I wanted to ask you about some of the questions, which I like that I think you gave me a Zach De La Rocca quote.
Yeah. Yeah, I had to give a rage shout out at the beginning of that.
Movements come and movements go. Leaders speak, movements cease when their heads are flown.
Yeah, man, Wake Up off that first album is definitely one of their best songs.
Oh, yeah. I would agree with you.
Most people know it is like, it's off in the Matrix.
Right. And that kind of like upsets me because to me it was always one of those deep cuts that I definitely agree is one of the best songs on the album.
It became more mainstream and you're like, fuck, I can't like it anymore.
They turned the power to the have-nots and then came the shot.
Yeah. That's a great one, man.
So the first question you posed to me is, why did Barack Obama's movement fail and will Bernie's movement be able to sustain? What did you mean by that?
So, I mean, like there seemed to be a huge grassroots movement under Obama, whether it was demographics showing up to vote that hadn't showed up to vote.
Yeah.
Or just like how MoveOn.org and a lot of these groups were super duper organized. And it basically, there was that feeling of being on the cusp of something great, especially after 8 years of, George W. Bush. People were like a breath of fresh air. His messaging, hope, all these type of things.
Well, couldn't that be boiled down to his campaign slogan was just change?
Right. Mm-hmm.
All right. I was just a couple of days ago, I looked at the clip of his, it was the night that he knew he won the election. And he walked out to the podium and he said, change has come. And and I looked at that
and I'm bringing back the entire Clinton economic team.
I looked at that, now with my hindsight lenses and went, what was the change that he brought?
Yeah, I mean, it's that's where the rubber meets the road. It's just like you can measure it in a lot of different ways. But I think in regards to ending the movement, it's just like there's so many stories written about how all those grassroots, basically like super duper progressive people, were pretty much said, all right, we won, now go back home, we got this. And then Obama's a masterful politician, he's going to cut the deal and win. But part of cutting the deal seemed to be to go against a lot of the campaign promises and more of the far left like policies that he was running on. And I think that's the disenchantment that a lot of people had.
Could you argue though, like his argument was that compromise is necessary in politics?
Yeah, but that's not what he ran on.
Right.
He was never like the incrementalism type of candidate. And then he became that guy. And even like during the primary this season, he was like lecturing, the woke left for being too progressive and saying it's not realistic and just one of those, you need to work with, the other side and blah, 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 to get anything done.
Interestingly, kind of steers back to the conversation that Ryan Grimm talks about the Democrats moving more towards being centrist or conservative instead of being really progressive or really left.
See, like the part that I understand a little bit is like they started losing a lot of elections.
Yeah.
And there was like early on, they put a couple.
This was like the
lefties up there and they
1970s,
lost.
right?
Yeah. So like, and then Reagan came in and they realized, oh shoot, we're going to keep on losing elections unless we somehow get funding on similar levels as the Republicans. In order to get the funding, you have to go right. You have to solicit more businesses. And Wall Street was like a big funneling ground at that point. So, I mean, it's just that was the slow pivot came from like in earnest, like, oh, we got to win more elections. And then they never looked back, man. I mean, Obama raising more money from Wall Street than Romney and McCain. Like, I mean, that should tell you something. If he's a Marxist, Kenyan, like whack socialist guy, but Wall Street loves him. Like that's the truth. That makes no sense. Like cognitive dissonance.
Great way to label that, because hearing those talking points come from people who were against Obama just frustrated me to the greatest heights, man. Oh, he's a Marxist and a basically a terrorist sympathizer. An early part of our conversation last time that we talked was about Phyllis Schlafly. And you're like,
I saw that Kate Blanchett show.
You're like, oh, I'm not really familiar with her. And I said, well, we talked about her in one of the history classes I took in college and how incredibly instrumental she was in the conservative half of kind of stomping the women's movement and the feminist movement. And so I was looking through some stuff on Wikipedia. I know this is sort of a digression. Do you know how reliable Wikipedia can be as a source?
I know it's one of those things that can constantly be edited.
One of the myths out there that I feel like are perpetuated by people who don't want a person to gain knowledge is that Wikipedia is unreliable because it's contributed to by regular people who are contributors. But studies have found, and I've actually found, that just by going and clicking on the citations of it, that you can get led to the sources.
Dude, that's the gold. That's the gold, exactly. The primary source, for sure.
I forget what study it was, but it basically pointed out that it's just as, if not more, factually accurate than like Cyclopedia Britannica. I'm sure a lot of like 20-year-olds, if they're hearing this, will go, "What's Britannica?" But anyways, I digress. I wanted to point out this part I found who was talking about how she helped defeat the Equal Rights Amendment during the 70s. And this made me kind of think of our current conversation about, and I'd like to point out to anyone who's listening how damn important it is to know history and know how all these things are connected. You know, it's so easy for us to look at the last 20 years and go, geez, how did we get here? But if you're able to look at the last 50 years, it really helps paint the picture of how we got to where we are and why things are the way they are. So this is from a Johns Hopkins University academic paper written by, and I didn't really look at the author too much. Her name is Judith Glaser Ramo.
Okay.
But something taken from it on here was talking about Phyllis Schlafly, and it says, as moderates, we thought we represented the forces of reason and goodwill, but failed to take seriously the power of the family values argument and the single-mindedness of Schlafly and her followers. The ERA's defeat seriously damaged the women's movement, destroying its momentum and its potential to foment social change. Eventually, this resulted in feminist dissatisfaction with the Republican Party, giving the Democrats a new source of strength that, when combined with overwhelming minority support, helped elect Bill Clinton to the presidency in 1992 and again in 1996.
Nice. He's the biggest feminist of them all.
Yeah. I just love the ladies. You know, whatever I think of when I think of Bill Clinton and women is, I think it's in Dave Chappelle's Killing Them Softly comedy special when he's like, I did not have sexual relations, and then he smells his finger with that woman.
I definitely smell your finger, then smell the cigar.
Oh, yeah, that story you told me. Jesus.
Yeah, so like one of the things that came out was, and I know there's like people are making jokes about the cigar forever, but it's for good reason for younger people to know. Is the cigar was used during foreplay,
God.
and that omission by Monica Lewinsky led a lot of people to be like, wait a second, how do you? Oh, I know, and I've tried it a few times. My wife didn't appreciate it, but it was a delicious cigar. When I smoked it later, this shit just lit up.
For anyone who might be having trouble nailing this down, you're saying that Bill Clinton stuck cigars in Monica Lewinsky's vagina, right?
Yeah, or anus.
Either.
But I assume vagina, sure.
Maybe he had a cigar shocker that he lined up.
Yeah, it was a multiple hell, like yeah.
God.
No, that's one of those funny things. People our age at least don't. They kind of, I was coming of age around that time. I wasn't really watching, the nightly salacious stuff.
I think I mentioned to you that the Clinton impeachment hearings and all the hoopla around it at the time was sort of what cemented my disdain for politics at the time when I was in high school. That, by the time I graduated, I was like, fuck politicians and fuck everything about them. They're all liars.
It's definitely like, I feel like everyone gets to that moment, and then eventually they get old and you like choose a side. And you go back to, wanting to choose a winning team.
Well, one of the funniest things is baby boomers, like being the revolutionaries of the 1960s. Oh, fuck the establishment, man. Burn that flag. Pot should be legal. Right. Now becoming like the moderates, who are denouncing us trying to push forward for progress.
No, I know. It's they all became investment bankers and really took off during the 80s, As much as they hate Reagan, rhetorically, they fucking love the market. Nah, the boomers definitely get a lot of shit, and it's for good reason. I just feel like shit, man. I mean, like, Joe Biden's like a goddamn boomer. It's like that they will not let go of fucking power. They got power like after Watergate in like the late 70s and have maintained control of power for like 40 goddamn years and just won't go
I heard
away.
of a really disgusting comment put out there by some young people on social media that maybe the coronavirus will finally get rid of the boomers and we'll be able to, I don't know what they said, start anew. And it's like,
yeah, and then it started killing young people too. And we're like, just kidding.
Right.
We gotta stop this.
Yeah, Julia just pointed out some article from the Washington Post to me saying that coronavirus is shown a link to strokes in people in their 30s and 40s who survive it.
Yeah, I actually saw that the other day because my sister has been very on top of it, having her kind of dealt with her situation recently. But yeah. No, it seems to be like a cornucopia of shit, man, and they still don't have it nailed down on like what this is exactly, which is terrifying. But
right, but don't worry, it's gonna go away by the end of this month.
Yeah, man. I mean, Trump's definitely his press conference.
Did you hear? I read that the White House asked him to stop having press briefings, or at least have a lot less.
Oh, yeah, the White House did. So he was wandering around the halls and the House talked to him.
Well,
it's just like, stop.
My guess would be, advisors were going, you're really starting to look like... Well,
I think, like, if you're an advisor, at least to him, it was working in his favor for a while, and, like, approval ratings were going up, and then they started going down. And, like, if to him, like, that's all that fucking matters.
Right.
So I feel like he'll, like, once that's turned, he'll definitely push back. That's where he's good at it, dude. He's really good at kind of seeing which way the wind blows and like.
Did you hear that thing where he talked about his numbers as opposed to his kids' numbers?
Yeah. Yeah, dude, I follow him on Twitter, so I see that shit.
He's
all
like basically
the time,
saying
about the fucking numbers.
His numbers are more important than his kids' like emotional well-being, in a sense.
Actually, I didn't see that.
He's basically saying like his popularity matters more to him than like he's comparing his ratings to his kids' ratings.
Well, shit, man. I mean, at least he's talking about those mongoloids now instead of just comparing it to Monday Night Football numbers and the Bachelor season premiere numbers and shit like that. Yeah.
Well, we kind of digressed again, but as we tend to do. We were talking about Clinton and Lewinsky, and I actually wanted to ask you, have you ever watched Lewinsky's TED Talk?
No, I heard it was good though. What's the gist?
The gist is just the damage that bullying can do and how hyper-focused bullying has become through social media. And that she was just talking about like she thought it was bad enough in the 90s by seeing like all these news headlines or tabloid covers talking about her. It was interesting as she pointed out a monologue I think that somebody did on SNL that talked about her in the sense of like she's not even that attractive and how acceptable that was at the point at that time. Oh no, it was Jay Leno. Jay fucking Leno. Hey, remember when I was funny? Eat Doritos.
Yeah,
she's saying so here's like one of the top late night talk show hosts on syndicated national television joking about her not being that attractive. Ha ha ha. But so then she
was young.
Yeah,
too,
and she was young. So she goes on not only to say how much that damaged her sense of self-worth, but just when she thought it couldn't get worse, then social media came along and suddenly like she got hateful comments delivered straight to her. And so she was really coming out not only to like point out how damaging all that stuff was to her as a person, but also saying like, look, people who use social media need to know how hurtful and damaging this is when they direct a comment towards anybody, pointing out like the rise in teen suicides and stuff as a result of that. I did think it was really good, and it made me see her in a light as a human being instead of like.
You didn't look at her as a human being before that?
Dude, to be honest, when you're a teenager and you come up on this whole scandal, I mean, like.
Sure.
I was watching SNL where they were doing nothing but making jokes about the whole impeachment trial and the Lewinsky thing. Then we hear basically everyone on TV make jokes about it, and they just joke about how Lewinsky was just, they reduced her to a bimbo that wanted to have sex with the president.
Yeah, honestly, man, I mean, like that's one of the techniques that like the Clintons use.
Yeah.
If it's like the ad hominem, it's like make the story become about the person instead of like what actually happened. So it's actually like to the benefit of Bill Clinton.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of things about Hillary actually having a big hand in suppressing or silencing women that Bill Clinton fucked.
Yeah, I heard a lot about that too. I wonder if she had a liaison or like I wonder what the sources are in that, but it's totally believable.
Yeah.
Because I mean, like I've seen interviews with her where she's like definitely talked shit about like these women being opportunistic and being liars. So I mean, like she definitely didn't give them the benefit of the doubt. And I think one of the funny things she said, or this is a quote, where she's like, "I'm not Tammy Wynette. I'm not just standing by my man." It was definitely some condescending shit coming from that woman.
What does that mean?
There is a
song, like, I know the song, but how is she
man.
saying that she's not just standing by him?
She's not. She's not like a naive person who's just going to be like walked all over.
But is she a power hungry person who's willing to sweep certain things under the rug?
The people of Libya. Yeah, let's ask the people of Iraq and Libya that question.
Right.
Yeah, dude. It always pissed me off. She never fucking owned Libya. You can watch videos of like live slave auctions in Libya right now, and hey, but Gaddafi's gone, and she had that really creepy interview where she found out, and they're like, "We saw, he died," and it's a failed state.
Wow.
Yeah.
They're selling slaves currently?
Oh yeah, dude. Google that one. If you want to see some sad, dark shit, Google that one. Libya is such a failed state to where it's digressed to that part. And it's just a failed American policy of saying, hey, we're going to replace a dictator. And whoever follows him will be better than that person, right? It doesn't matter. We don't have a plan for what happens after.
I know we had one policy of intentionally replacing a dictator with someone that we deemed better, like in the case of Iran in the 1970s or...
Yeah, they've done that. They've done this a shitload of times where they just kind of have like their own proxy ruler, whether it's like Mubarak in Egypt or the one in Iran's the best example though, because we were like super duper close.
I
with
even
the Shah.
read in John Perkins' Confession of an Economic Hitman that Saddam Hussein was a result of one of those coups.
Yes.
That he.
Yes. It was about the Hashemite kingdom.
Yeah, that he was our boy that was groomed to take over. And then once he was in there, he was like, fuck you. I like all this power. And
no, dude, it's even less than that, man. We were allies with him literally up until we invaded the country. There's like this, we were allies with him throughout the 70s, the 80s. We totally backed him during the Iran-Iraq war, where I think 1 million Iranians were killed in that war. But we were allies with them. This is another true story. I would totally Google this. I forget the diplomat's name. I know the first name's April something, but she had right on the eve of the Iraq war. She had a meeting with Saddam Hussein where he asked her straight up, "Hey, is you guys going to do anything if I invade Kuwait?" And she pretty much said, "Yeah, it's our policy to remain neutral." And then we did not remain neutral. He did that. We used that as a pretext to invade. And that whole Bill Hicks bit where how much he hated H.W. Bush, it was for that. Basically, he felt like it was a bait and switch. He was an ally with us for decades, then all of a sudden we allow him to do shit and then give him a false pretense we won't do anything and then invade him. So he was like Bill Hicks was saying, I have nothing against the American people. I just want to have H.W. Bush beheaded and kick his head down the road like a fucking soccer ball, and that's what it was, dude. He's he felt, I was your boy. What happened?
Oh.
Yeah, but that whole meeting with the diplomat, that was a real thing where he thought that he's like, hey, if I do this, you guys are going to do anything. She's like, yeah, we're not going to do anything. And then
shady shit, man.
Yeah, shady shit.
So I kind of want to steer us back towards the conversation we were having.
Yeah,
so
man.
We started off talking about how Obama's movement failed, but I don't think we got there. So the whole question was, how did Barack Obama's movement fail, and will Bernie's movement be able to sustain? So obviously Bernie's not the candidate, but his movement is still alive in the sense that 70% of Americans are talking about healthcare for all and stuff like, maybe not the same percentage, but a lot of people talking about free education. So why did Obama's movement fail?
I think Obama's failed because it was cynical. It was basically he ran on one thing and then totally implemented other policies while in office. And the thing about Bernie's, I think it's going to continue. I feel like Bernie's giving up on it, man. I really do. I'm going to vote for Biden. I think it is that way, dude. I really, truly do. I think that he really liked Joe. He really likes his Senate, position. He likes the power. I mean, to a certain degree, he kind of weighed it all out and chose to go for, as he says, not me, us. Well, he chose me. He chose me and kind of left all those other people in the fucking dark.
Well, could it be that he's just thinking that he can continue to push the Democratic Party more left?
Yeah, I mean, that's the idea, but is he pushing the party left by supporting Biden? Right. I don't think so. It's kind of hard to feel like where we are right now, because it's like I was saying, the lesser of two evils have gotten us to this point where so much terrible policy has been created by the Democrats. And now Bernie is going to go from the rhetoric of this is a revolution to Trump's just that bad. Trump's that bad where I'm going to sell out everything that I stand for and back Biden.
I was surprised when he pulled out because there was still so many states left to have primaries. But it also seemed like he announced that within a day or two of the Wisconsin primary, where basically Republicans fucked everybody and decided to just have the primary anyways and not allow mail-ins.
The Supreme Court ruling in the state did that. Dude, it's crazy though, man. I mean, I'm not going to digress too much, but the Democrats really fucked up previously in other states too, because they were pushing it. Like Biden's on record was saying that he wants to continue. Tom Perez, the head of the DNC, was pushing for stuff to continue, and this is while there's a lockdown on. So I mean, the Democrats are fucking terrible too on this record of what they've done this campaign.
I didn't know that.
But Wisconsin was
Basically,
just
what I
the
was
worst,
saying is I feel like Bernie might have like saw that and been like, okay, the deck is stacked against me. Obviously, I'm not going to come out.
He just figured it out.
Right.
Yeah, no, I think he really was. I mean, just to give him the benefit of the doubt, I think he was probably looking out for the safety of people.
Yeah.
Because if he continued the primary and kept on fighting, I mean, he was weighing probably out a lot. It would cause a lot of deaths. I mean, there's like poll workers that have been proven to have gotten sick and died. It's not many of them, but a couple of them. And those are in states with the Democrats were like pushing for. So I mean, it's a shame, but like there has to be another leader to kind of come up because Bernie's definitely pivoting towards the establishment. I think that the movement could continue. But it's hard to like evaluate.
Let me ask you another question related to the last time that our government gave out billions of dollars and Obama. Why did the Occupy movement start, and why did that fail ultimately?
Yeah, so this is one of those other things that kind of goes back to Obama, where he promises hope and change and then brings in the entire like Bill Clinton's economic team from Citibank and all these other like neoliberal guys that are tied to investment banks, Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley and all these other ones. It's just the American people to a certain degree, they know it's kind of like a shell game. And, you know, if you look at like Trump, it's the populist right that wanted to burn down the establishment. You look at Bernie's populist movement, it's the populist
they wanted to burn down
that wants to burn down the establishment. Yeah, man. I mean, like the largest voting demographic in the entire country is people that don't even vote. There's over 100 million people that hate the system so much, know both sides are so full of shit, but they don't even care about voting. They know it's corporately owned and compromised. So when you have Obama coming in, all right, terrible economic crisis he inherited from W. Bush. Absolutely. Yeah. Is he going to do what happened in the savings and loan crisis? Is he going to hold people accountable, do that old-fashioned start at middle management and get people to roll upwards? She's like, no, he's not going to hold these people accountable. As part of the deal was fashioning all of these deferred prosecution agreements or non-prosecution agreements, because they wanted a bunch of wins, and it's pretty hard to like go after like a lot of the large institutions.
You know what I found interesting about the quote "too big to fail" statement at the time was like, wait a second, and this was coming from this was the end of the Bush administration when they began the bailouts. Okay, you are the same guys that belong to the party that always says how the free market regulates itself and how it should be totally unregulated because it was built to work that way. But then you turn around and you're telling me that an entity within the free market is too big to fail, and that's why we got to help it.
Oh, yeah, and then it becomes just socialism for the super
Right,
rich.
so how is that a free market where you're just allowing something to fail because it didn't have the right business practices?
No, that's the thing is it's not a free market, and they would argue that they're trying to prevent like another Great Depression. And it gets into this like they need to provide liquidity so there's not a credit crisis and people have access to cash and they provide that service and it's actually a good thing and blah, 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 blah. So, yeah, I mean, you're exactly right, though. It's not a free market.
Yeah.
They choose winners and losers. I mean, if you look at the amount of subsidies like various industries are given, whether it's like the energy sector or whatever, just like, yeah, I mean, like there's so many incentives to where someone like Paul Ryan that just talks about like Ayn Rand level or like Frederick Hayek level of like free market, total bullshit. Yeah. Total bullshit. And so I think that the movement failed and Occupy started happening when Obama just didn't do anything and hold anyone accountable. I mean, like, you take a country like Iceland, like a lot of people were held accountable and went to prison. I just think that there's a certain amount of the plebs out there, you know, but we're all taken to the streets. We want a little bit of blood. We want people to be held accountable for breaking the law. And it's just the system. It's like okay to admit that there's bias in the system. Like a rich guy can afford a better lawyer, so therefore he's less likely to go to prison than a poor guy can't afford a good lawyer. But but the level we're at now is like the rich guy doesn't even get brought to trial for a crime. Yeah. It's like this shit. It's just like we're at that level of corruption to where
well, you know,
You just
What
pay
that
a
makes me
fine.
think of is Enron. So why did the
Oh,
guys of
dude.
Enron get prosecuted, but not Goldman Sachs or J.P. Morgan executives?
Dude, how funny is it that the last time there was any kind of corporate accountability in this country, it was during the George W. Bush administration. That was like the last fucking time. It's like there was so much corruption during that administration too, but really like Enron and these guys, they went to fucking prison. Like there was criminal charges brought against them and Arthur Anderson, who was one of the big like 5 accounting firms that got caught shredding like literally like thousands of pounds
Wow.
of documents for Enron. See, what's pretty interesting. In answer to that question, though, the Arthur Anderson one cost 25,000 jobs, and it kind of became like a pariah to where when Eric Holder was working for Bill Clinton in the Justice Department, he wrote a memo that became really famous, known as the Holder Memo, where he talked about collateral consequences. And there was this like kind of case law that was used in action with how they went after Wall Street guys in 2008, to where you have to weigh out the costs of everything. If you want to take Goldman Sachs to court for creating a product and then selling it to people when they knew it was like fraudulently built to fail, you better weigh out how much that court's going to cost, how many jobs are at stake, all these type of things, which leads to Obama entering. He's young in office. He doesn't want any losses. He doesn't want any long court cases. He likes their campaign money. So you just get a deferred prosecution agreement to where they don't have to admit anything wrong, and they give like $400 million. And then Eric Holder can say like, hey, look, we got $400 million. We can do a lot of great things with that money. Like we could take them to court and we could fucking lose. Like, and it could take years and cost like the public like so much money to prosecute. So they just like started weighing it out. But the benefits of that were all in the white collar criminals. They were just like, fuck, dude, we can do this and get away with it. Do you think that they were like, next time we learned our lesson, we're not going to do it again? You think that's going to happen, or are they going to be like, fuck that?
To kind of piggyback on that, have you followed very recently how with the CARES Act, it seems like the same banks and companies are getting billions of dollars from our government while working families are getting a fucking $1,200 check?
That truly seems to be the case, man. I mean, the funniest thing in the world is Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, like an old Goldman guy. He said when he was asked about it, how long someone could live off the $1,200, and he said, I think it was 10 weeks or some shit like that. Like these people just aren't living in reality. Like people are getting like a subsidy, and they're getting insurance on their paychecks, and some small businesses are getting helped out a lot. Like I know in the medical field, like Medicare is fronting a lot of money. But when you get to the next level, though, and you get to the investment banks and hedge funds that are getting loaned, I think it was like $500 billion that Mnuchin gets like to give to whoever wants under his own discretion. But the flip side is they get to leverage it out, which means they get to borrow against that tenfold. So if a bank gets like $10 million, or $10 billion, multiply that times 10. That's how much they can actually borrow from the Federal Reserve. Yeah, so I mean that's when the trillions numbers you hear like, well, the CARES Act was like 2 or 4 trillion, and then you sacked on with how much they can leverage that up, and the trillions get outrageous. And that was very similar to what happened in 2008 as well. The funniest example of, because I don't know a lot about this, but I just hear what like insiders are talking about, and a lot of investment bankers are laughing at the fact that BlackRock got put in charge of this giant program to pretty much buy corporate debt. And you should Google that company and Google this article that Matt Taibbi wrote. You'll definitely be like head scratching, being like, how did they allow the wolves in the hen house type of thing?
I saw BlackRock mentioned in some article I was reading, but I didn't follow the rabbit hole.
It's the tip of the iceberg when you're learning about some of these giant private equity companies, because they are literally the biggest companies in the entire world.
And we've never heard of them.
The Fed, for the first time, they're like entering into markets they have not been before, and they're buying corporate bonds. So it's not just like municipal bonds or treasury bonds. And so they put BlackRock in charge of overseeing who purchases and what purchases the corporate bonds, while simultaneously saying, and by the way, your corporate bonds are totally fair game. Like if you want to buy your own or give them to companies, like it's totally your sole discretion, like any conflict of interest there.
Yeah.
It's fucking nuts, man. It's like the corporate Wild West. So the CARES Act, the people are getting a $1,200 check, and these other guys are getting billions that they can leverage.
Yeah, meanwhile, the wealth gap is bigger than it's ever been in the history of the United States.
Yeah. And where's the progressive left, Jeff? Seriously, though, man. AOC, Bernie, all these people that are against this shit, they voted for it.
That's what I find interesting because, much earlier we talked about Obama's evoking compromise as the primary tool for a good politician. So a lot of Democrats, just like some Republicans, argue that, well, we had no choice but to pass it because the American people needed relief. And we couldn't sit here and debate, for another week on this bill. So what's your take?
I just tend to think they didn't. My take is they didn't understand what the hell's going on. And it's one of those bills that's probably, you get some giant multi-thousand-page bill. You think they wrote that in a week, or you think that was like sitting around? I mean, they definitely like Bernie's always Bernie's been the king of amendment for a long time. People always give him shit for not, writing a lot of legislation. That's just because he's not a lobbyist whore. The lobbyists are the ones that write the legislation, give it to the politician, and then someone like Marco Rubio can be like, I passed the most legislation last year that was already written for me, ready to go. So, I mean, like, Bernie will add some good amendments, and he did to the CARES Act. But at the same time, it was a massive giveaway, and it's going to create even a larger wealth gap than already exists. It's just like the consolidation is going to continue. And where the fuck was AOC? Where was the squad? Where are all these progressives? Like you said, maybe they were scared into voting for it, but this was their time to step up and like actually go to bat for the people they claim to be fighting for. And they just bent the knee to the corporate interest and gave them exactly what they wanted with not much of a fight. It was like 86-0 in the Senate, man. Warren, Bernie. I mean, like, it's just a shame.
Do you think that's because, Congress people like AOC are really feeding us bullshit, or because they really were just caught off guard and didn't have much of a clue what was happening in the moment?
So I think it's a combination of both. I think someone like AOC really is a careerist. I really do, man. I do think that she's making cynical compromises, and doesn't want to. She's definitely kissing the ring of Nancy Pelosi and like the head of the DNC to a certain degree. But yeah, man, I mean, like, I do think that she is mostly in good earnest, though, and I think she wanted to help people, and she was overwhelmed. But I think she's definitely, same thing with Bernie, man. They're definitely making self-preservation.
This brings up an interesting argument that I've always pondered this, though. If you are in politics, I give people. Now, I know this isn't true all the time because some people just seek power and money. But as someone who has been considering myself like running for office, I know that there are people out there who get into it with the intention of doing good on as grand of a scale as is humanly possible. And you might go into it being very idealistic and thinking, I'm going to initiate a lot of change and a lot of good, but then you get into this realm where you realize, oh, I have to work with 100 people who have differing goals and opinions on trying to get something to pass. Now I know that I have to make friends, compromise. Is it more of that than people just like going, well, I got to look out for me?
I think so. I think that it probably is. It's the willingness to respect the institution and bow down to the power structures that are there. I mean, there's a lot of sharp people. Nancy Pelosi is like apparently like an incredible workaholic that knows deep like votes that like all of the people voted for, like, some random first term congresswoman from Ohio. They don't vote the way Pelosi does. Apparently, like in a large meeting, she'll call them out and know specifically. I mean, like, these people are kind of whipped in line. You always hear about like majority whips and terms like that. There is a consensus of like voting blocks amongst different caucuses and within parties. And you get a lot of shit when you don't vote with your party on things.
Hey, this reminds me.
And that means...
I wanted to ask you, because I hear the term caucus as it relates to Congress all the time. I know what
Mhm.
caucus means in primary voting, but what is a congressional caucus?
So they pretty much just look at it like a group of like-minded people that vote similarly. Like there's like a progressive caucus. There's like I think there's like an African American caucus. They may not call themselves that, but like it's just basically like-minded people that form
You
voting
said
blocks.
caucus.
Yeah. I'm sure there's a black metal band with spelled differently. That's pretty much what it is. It's just like-minded people within the same party, like forming as one giant
Thank you
voting
for
block.
putting that in layman's terms.
Yeah. No, it all gets confusing.
Oh, yeah.
That's part of the hard thing for the American people. We don't really have the language to identify what the problem
for sure,
is.
man.
It's like one of those divide and conquer things. Like you only got to stick it in the fairway of Republican or Democrat, and you can't go outside that. You don't fully understand what's going on, and you can't develop the proper language.
Yeah.
So, like, diagnose and
It's
provide
just like
solutions.
if you've ever gone and read an actual bill.
Yeah, they're all legalese.
For me, by the time I get through 2 sentences of it, I find myself going back and reading it again and going, what the fuck is this saying?
You need to go to law school, Jeff.
Apparently, but we could make so much progress if, for one, we could just put bills and amendments into language that the typical American, maybe I should be careful what I ask for, that a typical person could understand.
It's really tough because legalese are terribly hard to write. I mean, like, feels like it's obfuscation that's going on for sure, man. When you have like a 2,000-page bill that barely anyone can read, you know that the fine print is where the devil's playground right there.
You know what? I have. I know a married couple who are both attorneys. I should have them on and ask them their opinion because I've always felt like there's a certain protectionism of the use of legalese in contracts and documents and in the writing of laws that's meant to kind of create a tier system to where you have to have attorneys in public office and and use them to basically enter into any damn agreement.
Right. No, I mean, it's like social Darwinism to a certain degree because if you have a tax attorney, do you realize like what a huge advantage you have as opposed to someone who's just like doing their taxes on their own in regards to finding various loopholes that have been put there on purpose for people that have the means to like figure this
That's
stuff
what I
out.
tell people a lot of the time who have said something along the lines of how does that rich person manage to skate around so many taxes or whatever. And I say, dude, it's because they have a fucking team of people that are on their payroll whose sole job it is to make them money and save them money.
I know, man. And then if you get someone of means and you're kind of talking about it, they want to keep the system kind of going.
Yeah.
That's like this is a great quote I really like. It's really hard to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on him not understanding it. And that can be looked at whether it's like we're talking about now, like why would someone who's benefiting from Trump's tax code, want to recognize what's going on and speak out against it? Or like, why would someone in the media, their salaries depending upon a certain perspective, why would they, want to buck that?
No, I think you're completely right. The argument that I made to people back in 2008 when, that term too big to fail was being tossed around and I was saying like, what is this bullshit? And some people would actually try to argue to me what they mean is that they don't want us to go into a depression. I'm like, no, I get the fucking argument, but my point is, as being a person who's always lived paycheck to paycheck, and basically so did my family and dozens of people I know, it ain't no thing to fucking be poor or wonder where your next meal's gonna come from. So I say, let the fucking thing fail, Totally different world, though, from someone who's got so much invested and so much to lose, I guess.
Yeah, and it's funny too because those people up top, they probably pat you on the head and be like, "It could get a lot worse, boy."
Well, or they would tell me that I haven't pulled myself up by my bootstraps.
Yeah, have you tried doing that yet? By the way,
I fucking fell on my head. It hurt.
Well, it's tough. It's interesting though because even affluent people with how many tens of millions of people are out of work. That there's a feeling of being untethered. People are trying to find meaning, but it's like wildly incoherent right now.
You mentioned the history of the federal pushback against the populist uprising in the United States.
It can pretty much be looked at as like the government. This is kind of a stupid thing to say, but the government support grassroots movements that try to snuff them out and keep the existing power structures in place. And you can go back to whatever era of history you want for proof, but I just think that when the FBI, under their program COINTELPRO, and the CIA, which is a lesser-known program called Chaos, is where they had direct infiltration of citizen groups. And in the FBI's case, I mean, there's mounds of evidence of them actually murdering Black Panthers. This guy, Fred Hampton in particular, is a grisly story because he was a rising star. But I mean, shoot, whether it's teachers' unions, which is happening now even, you're seeing paramilitary groups linked to like Eric Prince's Blackwater. This is an article
showing
from, like,
up at teachers' unions meetings?
Like basically staged as a member. Oh yeah, I'm a member of the Democratic Socialists of America, or like any kind of grassroots movement. But it was there was a lot of them under J. Edgar Hoover, where there would just be infiltration by people to cause chaos, gain intel, break it up, sabotage. It's like the agent provocateur type of person. COINTELPRO, I feel like most Americans, that and the program Chaos by CIA, people need to understand this, because when you have a character like Trump, he's so terrible to where you're running into the arms of the FBI and the CIA, and you're asking people like James Comey and John Brennan, you're like, protect us, please, please. As much as, the deep state's a really stupid term, it's like there is a history in this country of some of our worst actors being from this intelligence community. And I just think COINTELPRO and Chaos were the most successful in infiltrating and breaking up a lot of grassroots movement throughout our history.
Well, that reminds me of the Leonard Peltier events.
I'm not familiar.
Well, Zach De La Roca from Rage Against the Machine was heavily about it. Essentially, the FBI went to his Indian reservation and they got in a shootout and they gunned down some people, and that's when they arrested him and took him to prison.
Oh, shit. Oh, man. They sprinkled a little crack on him.
Sprinkle a little crack on him, get the fuck out of here.
It's so funny, man, because, like, everyone, I feel like most Americans are like, yeah, J. Edgar Hoover's that guy. He sure was something else. But like the FBI as an institution it's just like they're the good guys looking out for us, to where they've always been some of the largest pieces of shit in American history. Not everyone is. I'm sure there's really great people, and there's like a giant bureaucracy of well-intended people. But then you get into things like them trying to blackmail Martin Luther King to kill himself, otherwise they'll release all the information about him cheating on his wife and attending orgies and shit like that. It's like Americans just are not privy to that kind of
information. Putting tons of pressure on John Lennon by following him all the time. And
making him write shittier music as a solo artist than he did with the Beatles. I know what they were doing.
I resent that as a John Lennon fan.
Hey, man, I'm a John Lennon fan, too. I loved how he smacked around his first wife. That's just, I got standards, No, but seriously, you should check out that letter if you've never read it, of the letter that got sent to Martin Luther King from the FBI agent telling him to kill himself. That exists. It's a good read.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to check that out. Well, we've ended on a really positive note.
For sure.
What was that thing Bill Hicks said? Your government is under control, America. Go back to sleep.
Yeah, exactly.
I think if there's any message that a person could take away from our conversation, though, it's don't get caught up in the my team versus your team bullshit arguments, and just look at things objectively and look further than the article that's presented to you.
For sure.
Try to be independent and objective. Otherwise, you're just playing their game and you're falling right into where they want you to be. The proverbial
scary, man. They got a lot of tools they can use against us. So they got a lot of, it's scary there. They got a lot of tools they can, use against us. We're in some kind of weird revolution right now. And it's unlike any revolution.
The TikTok revolution?
Yeah, dude. I mean, that's part of it. But, you look around the world and there's unrest everywhere. And there's pushback happening, all across Europe. And it's pretty goddamn weird. But, all we can do is stick together and realize that partisan divide's an illusion, man. Your neighbor with the Trump signs, most likely a pretty good dude. And you just got to talk to one another.
Very true. Right. On that note, I would say, like, that'd be a great homework assignment for people to go talk to those. Well, obviously, practice safe social distancing, but go talk to that neighbor who you know to be a Trump supporter, and don't go in locked and loaded, but just go in like, hey, man, what's up? You know what I mean? Like, because I used to actively seek out Republicans to talk to during the George W. Bush years, just to see if they would say something that would be enlightening to me, like, oh, I'd never considered that point of view. It just, as it just so happened, though, I usually would hit a brick wall and get frustrated because the person I was talking to would like, have you ever found when you start to talk politics with someone who has opposing views with you, that there becomes this wall at a certain point you just can't break through?
For sure. Yeah, I mean, it's like that, or like the eyes glaze over. Like anytime I try to talk about this with my wife.
Oh yeah, that happens to me in my home too.
Yeah, no, it's hard to engage, man. People don't like pushback, and they just want to be told what they want to hear for the most part.
I would say this then, and this goes to even the people who I agree with on ideals and politics most of the time. Consider the idea that you may be wrong.
Yeah, dude, I think that's a great one. I mean, that really is, because that's something to, like, you have to hold your own self to account for. Like, I have to take a step back. I mean, like, we always just want to do self-preservation and kind of put the pussy on a pedestal, if you will. And you gotta be reflective, man. You have to self-actualize, figure out your own garbage before you go around pointing fingers.
Was that Bill Hicks, Pussy on a Pedestal?
No, I think it was 40-Year-Old Virgin.
Oh yeah, you're right. I was thinking of the Never Saw the Pussy.
Yeah, for sure.
If anyone doesn't know what that means, you must look up Bill Hicks immediately. All right, man. Well, thanks for talking to me.
Yeah, it was nice chatting with you, buddy, for sure.
Thanks for coming on, man.
You got it, dude. I'd love to be a reoccurring character for you in the
for sure.
Absolutely,
one of
buddy.
My favorite people. Love your shit.
Thanks, man.
That concludes another episode of Into the Foxhole. I'll see you next time.